I'd like to begin today with a question, but I don't really want you to answer the question out loud. I'd like you just to answer the question in your own heart. And the question is this: what is the single most important thing in your life? Be as honest as you can. What's the single most important thing in your whole life? Think about that for a moment. I'd like you just, if you have an answer, just hold on to that answer, but also hold on to the question, because that question sort of captures the essence of today's passage in Haggai chapter 1, and it's going to recur throughout the message. In order to get to that question, we need to look at the passage. In order to get to the passage, I need to kind of fill in the backstory. So let me just catch us up to speed a little bit. Way back in the year 586 BC, the kingdom of Babylon attacked the nation of Judah, defeated Judah, destroyed Jerusalem, leveled the temple, and took the people of Judah into exile, into captivity in Babylon. Jeremiah prophesied that that exile would last for 70 years. That was in 586. In 539 BC, there was a power shift. Babylon was replaced by Persia as the superpower. King Cyrus of Persia, the following year, issued a royal decree allowing the Jewish people to return to their homeland and even to rebuild the temple that had been destroyed by the previous administration, the Babylonians. So in 536 BC, the temple construction began on the second temple in 536. However, 6 years into that reconstruction, King Cyrus died, which was not good news for the Jewish people. They lost their ally. And what happened then is 8 years of confusion and political instability within the Persian Empire. Some of the rulers who assumed the throne were not sympathetic to the Jewish cause. In fact, one of those rulers ordered that the temple reconstruction cease, which of course it did. But then in 522, King Darius rose to power, and when he assumed the throne, he reinstituted Cyrus's decree. In fact, he ordered that all of the expenses for reconstructing the temple and even the ongoing operating expenses of providing the sacrifices, all of it be paid out of the royal treasury. So it's very unusual. That decree came in the year 522. 2 years later, under the leadership of the governor Zerubbabel and the high priest Joshua, they still hadn't started. There was a popular saying among them in their community. We find it in verse 2 of Haggai chapter 1. They said, "The time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built." So they acknowledged, we do need to build the temple, but not yet. We'll do it later. So in that same year, God sent 2 prophets to them, an elderly man named Haggai and a young man named Zechariah. And these 2 prophets came to bring, among other things, a message of, it is time. I do want you to build the temple, and I want you to begin now. So you get the idea. The setting is that the vast majority of the Jewish people are scattered all over the world. Most of them are lost. Many of them are still in exile in Babylon. There's a tiny percentage of them that have come back to their homeland, and that percentage is known as the remnant. Now, if you were to do a man-on-the-street interview with the people who had returned to Jerusalem, and if you were to ask them the same question I asked you, what is the single most important thing in your life? I can almost guarantee you that every one of them, to a man, would give the same response. God. Yahweh is the single most important thing in our lives. And isn't it obvious? I mean, after all, they had sacrificed a great deal just to come back to the land of promise. I'm sure they sincerely believed God is the number one most important thing in our lives. But was that true? Well, there's actually an easy way to find out. All we have to do is simply take a tour of town, so to speak. So if we were to take this imaginary tour, we take these remnant, these returning exiles, and take them for a tour of their own town, the city of Jerusalem. And we begin with the residential section of town, and we note that there are some beautiful houses. There are some big houses. There are some fancy houses. They're very nice. And you could say, congratulations, you've done very well for yourselves. Well done. But then let's go to the Temple Mount. You have to climb over a bunch of rubble, broken stones, burned timber. And as you piece your way through the rubble, after 5 or 10 minutes of that, ask the question again. What's the single most important thing in your lives? Now the truth begins to emerge, doesn't it? It's not God, is it? It's me. It's me. It's my interest. It's my security. It's my comfort. It's my family. I'm the most important thing in my life. You see, their behavior betrays their belief. And it always does. I've said that before. I'm sure I'll say it many times. Our behavior betrays our belief. We can say we believe anything we want to, but we really only believe the things we actually do. I'm sure they sincerely believe that God is the most important thing in their lives, but their behavior betrayed them. And they saw that instead of being devoted to and preoccupied with God's interest, His kingdom, His purposes, they were instead preoccupied with their own. And their priorities were exactly backwards. So God extends the tour. He says, well, we've been to the residential area of town. We've been to the Temple Mount. Now let's go out into the fields. What do we see there? Well, we see the evidence of an ongoing drought. The crops are pathetic. The livestock are starving. The vines have shriveled. The wells are dry. And God points out that there's just never enough. They planted a great deal of seed, but the harvest, it just doesn't yield enough. They have some food to eat, but never enough. They're always hungry. They drink, but they're still thirsty. They have some clothes, but not enough to keep them warm. And so God issues a phrase that actually occurs twice in this chapter and twice in the next, the whole book of Haggai. He says, give careful thought to your ways. God wants them to pause and reflect on what is going on here. Why is this happening? Are they lazy? Are they cowardly? Clearly no. Because if there were lazy and cowardly Jews, they didn't make the trip back to the Holy Land. No, these are hardworking people. But no matter how hard they work, they can never seem to produce enough. They cannot adequately feed, clothe, or house their families. And so God asks them, ask yourselves, give careful thought to your ways. Why is this happening to us? And God wants them to ask that question because He desperately wants to answer it. So much so that He actually answers the question before they get a chance to ask it. And He essentially tells them that He is deliberately withholding blessing from His people because they're withholding their hearts from Him. Because they've withheld their love and their devotion from Him. He withholds these blessings from them. Essentially, God is deliberately inflicting pain on His people, forcing them to suffer to get their attention, hoping that they will be drawn back to Him, which is, of course, what He wants. God desires to be with His people, to bless His people, but He cannot do that. He can't walk close to a people who are going the other direction. So God deliberately inflicts pain on His people in order to get their attention and draw them back to Himself. Which raises a very interesting and important question. Where does suffering come from? What is the source of human suffering? Why are so many people hurting? And in today's passage, we receive one of the biblical answers. Certainly not the only one, but it's one that recurs. In today's passage, we're reminded that there is a fundamental, universal principle, if you will, that orders the world.